Okay, so picture this. It's the middle of a war. Soldiers are freezing in trenches, food is rationed, resources are scarce, and somehow the United States military decides that one of the most important things they can do for troop morale is build floating ice cream factories. Actual ships, converted specifically to produce ice cream at sea, so that sailors in the middle of the Pacific Ocean during World War II could have a scoop of vanilla after a mission. That's not a joke. That's not an exaggeration. That's a real, documented piece of American military history. And it's just one insane chapter in the actual history of ice cream, a food that people have been fighting wars over, building industries around, and obsessing over for literally thousands of years longer than most people would ever guess. Today, we're diving into where ice cream actually came from, how it evolved from a rare treat reserved for emperors and kings into a billion-dollar American industry. And trust me, once you hear where this stuff started, you're never going to look at a simple ice cream cone the same way again. So, let's rewind the clock, way further back than you'd expect, because the story of frozen desserts does not start in America. It doesn't even start in Europe. It starts thousands of years ago in ancient Persia, modern-day Iran, where wealthy Persians were combining snow brought down from mountaintops with fruit juices and rose water to create a chilled treat called faluda. And this wasn't some rare one-time thing. Persians had built entire underground structures called yakhchals, specifically designed to store and preserve ice year-round in a desert climate, which, if you think about it for a second, is an insane feat of ancient engineering, keeping ice frozen in the middle of a hot desert without a single piece of modern refrigeration technology. Meanwhile, over in ancient China, some historical accounts suggest that as far back as 200 BC, people were mixing milk with rice and packing it in snow to create an early frozen dairy dessert. And there are popular stories, though historians debate how much is confirmed fact versus legend, that Alexander the Great enjoyed snow flavored with honey and nectar during his military campaigns, using the same basic concept of combining ice with sweet flavoring that would eventually evolve into what we now call ice cream. The Roman Emperor Nero reportedly sent runners up into the mountains to collect snow, which servants would then mix with fruit toppings and honey, essentially creating one of the earliest known versions of a snow cone for the imperial elite. And keep in mind, this is happening around the 1st century, almost 2,000 years before your local gas station started selling slushies. And here's where the story takes a turn that a lot of people don't expect, because the technique that actually made true ice cream possible, meaning something with a smooth, creamy texture rather than just crushed ice with flavoring on top, is believed to have been developed in the Arab world sometime around the 10th century, where they created something called sharbat, a chilled fruit drink, and eventually developed techniques for combining ice, sugar, and dairy in ways that started to resemble what we would actually recognize as ice cream today. And the Arabic word for this frozen treat is actually where we get the English word sherbet from.
The story really accelerates when it hits Europe, and honestly, it's kind of a mess of competing legends. So let's separate what's actually documented from what's probably just a good story. There's a popular myth that Marco Polo brought ice cream recipes back from China to Italy in the 13th century, but most food historians now believe this is largely fictional, likely invented much later to make ice cream's origin story sound more exciting and exotic. What we do know for certain is that by the 16th century, Italian chefs, particularly in the wealthy courts of Florence, had become incredibly skilled at creating sorbetto, a frozen dessert made from fruit, sugar, and ice. And these recipes were treated like closely guarded state secrets, with chefs sometimes sworn to secrecy under threat of serious punishment if they revealed their techniques to competing kitchens or rival courts. This is honestly one of my favorite details in this entire story, the idea that in Renaissance Italy, a dessert recipe was considered valuable enough to protect like a state secret. When Catherine de' Medici, an Italian noblewoman, married the future king of France in 1533, she reportedly brought Italian chefs and their frozen dessert recipes with her to the French court, which is often credited as the moment ice cream truly entered French culinary culture and began spreading across European aristocracy. From there, ice cream became a status symbol among European royalty and the wealthy elite, precisely because it required access to ice, refrigeration, and skilled chefs, resources that were simply out of reach for the average person. The first recorded ice cream recipe published in English appeared in a cookbook back in 1718, and by the mid-1700s, ice cream had started appearing on menus in fashionable cafes across London and Paris, still very much a luxury item reserved for special occasions and the upper class. Now here's where it gets interesting for American history specifically, because ice cream crossed the Atlantic Ocean fairly early, and some of America's most famous founding fathers were genuinely obsessed with it. Thomas Jefferson, during his time serving as ambassador to France, developed a serious fascination with French ice cream techniques, and he actually brought back detailed recipes, including a specific 18-step vanilla ice cream recipe written in his own handwriting that still exists today in historical archives at the Library of Congress. George Washington was also known to be a massive fan, and historical records from Mount Vernon indicate he spent enormous sums of money on ice cream equipment and supplies during the summer months, treating guests to the frozen treat as a way of showing off both hospitality and wealth. Dolly Madison, wife of President James Madison, is often credited with serving ice cream at a presidential inaugural celebration in 1813, helping cement its status as a fashionable elite dessert among early American high society, though at this point it was still incredibly labor-intensive to make, requiring imported ice, hand cranking, and significant time investment, meaning it remained largely inaccessible to the average American family.
Everything changed in the mid-1800s, and this is where ice cream transforms from an elite luxury into something every American could actually afford. And it all comes down to a few key inventions and a genuinely underrated entrepreneur. In 1843, a New Jersey woman named Nancy Johnson patented the hand-cranked ice cream freezer, a device that made the churning process significantly faster and more consistent, though interestingly, she never really profited much from her own invention, and other manufacturers ended up capitalizing on her design far more successfully than she did. Then, in 1851, a Baltimore milk dealer named Jacob Fussell did something that genuinely changed everything. He opened what's widely considered the first wholesale ice cream manufacturing plant in the United States, and his business model was surprisingly practical. He had a surplus of milk and cream that wasn't selling fast enough, so producing ice cream became a smart way to use that excess product before it spoiled. And by mass-producing it at scale, he was able to drop the price dramatically, making ice cream accessible to working-class Americans for the very first time in history. This is genuinely one of the most underrated moments in American food history because Fussell essentially industrialized a dessert that had been an exclusive luxury for literal royalty for thousands of years and turned it into something a regular American factory worker could actually afford on a summer afternoon. As railroad networks expanded across the country and mechanical refrigeration technology improved throughout the late 1800s, ice cream production and distribution exploded, and ice cream parlors started popping up in towns across America, becoming genuine social gathering spots, especially important during the era of Prohibition, when alcohol was illegal. Ice cream parlors actually saw a surge in popularity as an alternative place for people to socialize instead of bars and saloons. The ice cream soda was invented around this same period, and it became such an enormous sensation that some very religious communities in America actually pushed to ban selling ice cream sodas on Sundays for being too indulgent and pleasurable for a day meant for solemn worship, which led enterprising soda fountain owners to invent the ice cream sundae, essentially the same treat minus the soda water, specifically to get around these religious restrictions while still selling something similar on Sundays. Then in 1904, at the St. Louis World's Fair, one of the most iconic origin stories in American food history supposedly took place. According to popular legend, a Middle Eastern waffle vendor at a neighboring booth ran out of paper cups and started rolling up his waffles into cone shapes so an overwhelmed ice cream vendor next door could keep serving customers. And while historians debate the exact details and whether this was truly the actual first waffle cone ever made, this event at the World's Fair is widely credited with popularizing the ice cream cone on a massive national scale across America.
Fast forward to World War II, and you get one of the wildest chapters in this entire story. The United States military considered ice cream so critical for troop morale that they invested significant resources into producing it for soldiers overseas. And by the end of the war, the Navy had actually converted a concrete barge into a fully functional floating ice cream factory, capable of producing several thousand gallons of ice cream per hour, specifically to boost morale among Pacific Fleet sailors, which is honestly one of the strangest and most fascinating uses of wartime resources in American military history. After the war, the ice cream industry in America absolutely exploded. Soft-serve technology emerged in the late 1930s and gained massive popularity through the 50s. Chains like Baskin-Robbins built entire brand identities around variety, famously offering 31 flavors, one for every day of the month. And the ice cream truck became a genuine piece of American suburban culture, complete with its own distinct jingle music that, according to some genuinely unsettling historical research, was sometimes based on old minstrel show tunes from a much less socially conscious era of American history, something modern ice cream truck companies have since worked to phase out and change. Today, ice cream remains a massive global industry worth tens of billions of dollars. Science has even given us an explanation for that sharp, stabbing brain freeze sensation, officially called sphenopalatine ganglioneuralgia, caused by rapid cooling of blood vessels in the roof of your mouth, triggering a pain response that your brain briefly and mistakenly interprets as coming from your forehead. And when you really step back and look at the full timeline, you've got a dessert that started with ancient Persian engineers building underground ice storage facilities in the middle of a desert that was treated as a state secret in Renaissance Italy, that founding fathers hand-wrote detailed recipes for, that religious communities tried to restrict on Sundays, that the United States Navy considered important enough to manufacture on a literal ship during an active war, and that somehow, after all of that incredible history, ends up being something you can grab for $2 at a gas station on a random Tuesday afternoon without thinking twice about any of it.